Welcome to the deep dive. We take your sources, your research, your notes, and really unpack them.
Yep, trying to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight for you.
Think of it as your shortcut to getting well informed. We find some surprising facts, maybe add just enough humor to keep things moving.
Hopefully.
Our mission today, we're exploring the really fascinating, often contradictory, and definitely personal world of animals and ethics.
That's right. We're looking at a whole stack of philosophical, scientific perspectives, trying to understand the moral standing of non-human animals.
And what that means for our daily choices, right?
Right.
Especially, what we choose to eat.
Exactly. Because, let's face it, many of us have this kind of odd relationship with animals. It can be really contradictory.
How so?
Well, you might feel, really strong outrage about puppy mills. You think, okay, dogs deserve consideration, absolutely.
Sure.
But then maybe shrug off the conditions in factory farms. Pretty horrific conditions, often. The thinking being, they're just animals.
Oh, that common justification.
So this deep dive should help you navigate that moral maze. We'll lay out the core arguments from philosophers, from scientists, trying to make sense of it all.
Okay.
We'll look at three general categories of thought about the place animals should have in our moral system.
Yeah.
Then we'll explore the key concepts, the practical implications that come out of these viewpoints, sort of connecting the dots between theory and how we actually perceive and interact with the animal kingdom.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our sources lay out these three main philosophical approaches. It's like a spectrum, really.
Mm-hmm.
First up are what the sources call indirect theories.
Hmm.
So what does that actually mean for animals if their moral status is only indirect?
Well, indirect theories generally deny animals direct moral status, or at least equal consideration with humans.
And why is that? What's the core reason?
The argument is usually that animals lack certain properties, things like, consciousness, reason, autonomy, things considered typically human. So if you shouldn't harm animals under these theories, it's not actually for the animal's own sake, which sounds weird, right?
Yeah, it does. So why shouldn't you harm them then?
Because harming them might reflect badly on human morality, or even corrupt it. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, René Descartes, they're often linked with these kinds of views.
Okay, Kant. Let's take him. What did he believe was so special about humans that animals just didn't have? What was his real focus?
Kant's theory, it really zeroes in on autonomy and rationality, the ability to set your own rules, follow moral law, reason about things.
And animals can't do that.
In his view, no. Other sort of Kantian ideas emphasize being a moral agent, knowing right from wrong, or having reciprocal relationships, being able to speak complexly, self-awareness.
So for him, animals were...
Essentially, they could be used as a means to an end, like tools almost. But, and this is an important nuance,
Good.
Kant did encourage treating animals with care, but not out of a direct duty to them.
So why then?
Because cruelty to animals, he thought, could make a person hard also in his dealings with men. It hardens you, basically.
I see. So it's an indirect duty. It's about preserving our own human moral feelings.
Exactly. It's a duty to ourselves, ultimately, which really shows how human-centric those early ethical systems often were.
And Descartes.
Huh.
Wow. He took an even more dramatic stance, didn't he? Almost unsettling. Like animals as robots.
He really did. Famously argued they're essentially automata machines. They act as if they're conscious, but according to him, they really aren't.
How did he justify that?
Well, he used Occam's razor, the principle of choosing the simplest explanation.
Right.
He thought explaining animal behavior mechanistically, like clockwork, was just simpler than assuming they had some kind of inner awareness of mind.
But humans were different.
Oh, yeah. For humans, he believed our complex, novel behavior, our spontaneous speech that expresses thought, that required something more. An immaterial soul.
And this line of thinking isn't totally dead, is it?
Not entirely. More recently, you have thinkers like Peter Harrison, Peter Carruthers, offering arguments against animal consciousness, too. They challenge the argument from analogy.
Which is it?
That's the idea that if something looks like us, behaves like us, has similar physical structures or evolutionary history, then it probably has similar inner states like consciousness.
Okay, and they challenge that how?
They suggest, for instance, that real conscious experience requires higher-order thoughts. Basically, thoughts about your thoughts. A kind of self-reflection, they argue, animals seem to lack.
That is pretty stark. The idea of animals as just machines, or that our kindness is only for our own sake? That's quite a thought.
It is challenging.
So moving along this spectrum,
Hmm.
where do animals start to get, more direct moral standing? That brings us to the second category. Direct but unequal theories. What's the big shift here?
Okay, yeah. Here, animals do get some direct moral consideration. There's a shift.
And the reason?
Primarily because they are sentient, meaning they can feel pain and pleasure. That capacity, sentience, is seen as a good enough reason not to cause them direct unnecessary harm.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense.
But but these theories still deny animals full moral status, equal status with humans.
So when interests conflict, like human interests versus animal interests,
Human interests usually win out, and the justification often goes back to those properties we talked about, our supposedly greater rationality, autonomy, self-consciousness.
and this is the kind of thinking that's used to justify certain practices.
Exactly. Historically, it's been used to justify things like animal experimentation or raising animals for food, provided, and this is the condition that unnecessary pain is avoided. Minimize suffering, but human interests still take precedence.
Okay. And then finally, the third category, moral equality theories. Now, this sounds like it really levels the playing field. Does it mean animals get the same moral rights as humans?
This is definitely where the conversation gets truly provocative. Moral equality theories argue for equal consideration and moral status for animals.
Equal consideration. What does that mean exactly?
It means they essentially refute the idea that those special human properties, like high-level rationality, are morally relevant for all moral considerations, especially when it comes to basic interests like avoiding suffering.
How do they argue that?
Often by analogy, they point out that many animals have similar physiological and mental capacities to, say, human infants, or humans with severe cognitive disabilities, what the philosophy literature often calls marginal cases.
Ah, the argument from marginal cases.
Right.
And Peter Singer and Tom Regan are the big names here, aren't they?
Absolutely central figures, yeah.
So what are their main arguments? They really challenge our default thinking.
Okay, so Peter Singer, hugely influential. He argues from a utilitarian standpoint. Meaning he focuses on consequences, maximizing overall well-being, minimizing suffering for everyone affected. He says, look, if we deny equal consideration to animals based on things like rationality or self-consciousness, well, logically, we'd have to deny it to some humans too. Those marginal cases, infants, people with profound cognitive disabilities.
But we don't do that.
Exactly. We intuitively accept, or at least most societies claim to accept, that all humans deserve equal consideration regardless of their cognitive abilities.
So Singer says.
He concludes we must extend that same principle, the principle of equal consideration of interests, to animals as well.
Equal consideration of interests. So similar interests get similar weight.
Precisely. Regardless of the species of the being who has the interest. So if an animal has an interest in avoiding pain, which seems obvious that interest should be weighed equally against a human's interest in, say, the pleasure of eating meat.
And if we don't weigh them equally.
He calls that speciesism, which he argues is a prejudice, similar in structure to racism or sexism, favoring your own group based on an arbitrary characteristic, in this case, species.
Wow. So for Singer, this isn't just philosophy in an armchair. It has immediate, pretty uncomfortable practical implications, right? What does his view demand of us? Like, no more bacon cheeseburgers.
Very much, yeah. For Singer, the principle demands an immediate end to practices like factory farming. The suffering involved is immense, and he argues the animal's interest in avoiding that suffering massively outweighs our interest in, well, taste pleasure.
And what about animal testing?
He condemns most of it, especially for non-essential things like cosmetics, and he pushes the point really hard on medical research, too.
How so?
He says if we're prepared to use animals because they are useful models but lack certain cognitive abilities, well, scientifically, it would often be better to use orphaned, severely cognitively disabled human infants. You wouldn't have the cross-species comparison problems.
But that's horrifying. We find that morally repugnant.
Of course we do. And Singer says, if we find it repugnant for those humans, but not for animals with similar or even greater capacities in some respects, then we're being speciesist. It's a deeply unsettling argument designed to force us to confront our inconsistencies.
Okay. And Tom Regan, how does his approach differ? Is it also about suffering? He talks about rights, doesn't he?
Yeah, while he arrives at similar conclusions about how we should treat animals, Reagan's grounding is different. He moves beyond Singer's focus on suffering and consequences, the utilitarian angle, and argues for animal rights.
Based on what?
Reagan argues that many animals, especially mammals over a certain age, are what he calls experiencing subjects of a life.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means they're not just sentient, not just feeling pain and pleasure. They have beliefs, desires, perception, memory, a sense of the future, an emotional life, a psychological identity over time. Much like us, in fundamental ways.
They have a life that matters to them.
Exactly, and he believes this gives them inherent value, which means they cannot be treated merely as resources, merely as means to human ends, regardless of the overall happiness it might produce.
This is not about calculating consequences, like for Singer.
Right. For Reagan, if these animals have inherent value, they have rights. And if those marginal case humans we talked about deserve rights, which we generally agree they do, then so do these animals. And that means we simply cannot exploit them, even if it seems to produce a greater good for humans. It violates their rights.
This raises a really fundamental question, doesn't it? What exactly is consciousness? How does it connect to suffering? Our sources get into this, even bringing up plants.
Right, that's the million-dollar question, almost. Sentience, the capacity for subjective experiences like pleasure or suffering, is really the key concept that keeps coming up.
And science is weighing in more now.
Increasingly, yes. You have things like the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness back in 2012. Scientists officially recognize sentience in mammals, birds, even cephalopods like octopuses.
And laws are changing.
We're seeing legislation, in places like the EU, the UK, reflecting this. It's not just about avoiding physical harm anymore. It's starting to include psychological welfare.
Like what?
Like considering an animal's need for social companions or opportunities to perform natural behaviors, rooting, nesting, exploring, not just keeping them physically alive, but allowing them to have a life with some quality.
But about that, Kale,
Huh.
seriously, does the debate really extend to plant consciousness? Does my salad feel pain when I chop it?
Well, our sources do highlight that while there is apparently a fierce debate in some philosophical circles,
Okay.
there's no real scientific evidence, not yet anyway, that plants show conscious behavior in the way we understand it for animals.
How do they know?
Well, they compare. Like certain Spartan spiders, they show evidence of proactive planning, mental maps to find prey, complex stuff. Experiments with plants just haven't shown that kind of action without a direct stimulus trail. They react, yes, but don't seem to plan or have subjective awareness in the same way.
But some philosophers still argue plants have interests.
Some do, yeah. Michael Martyr, for example. He argues plants have interests, they can thrive or they can wither. But then others question, well, is sentience really necessary for having interests? And even if plants have interests, do those interests carry moral weight in the same way an animal's interest in avoiding pain does?
So it's complicated.
It's very complex, yeah. It really pushes us to define consciousness precisely. But the current scientific consensus doesn't put plants in the same boat as animals regarding suffering-based moral consideration.
Okay, so if sentience is the key for animals, why is there still debate about whether they suffer? Isn't feeling pain enough? My dog yelps if I accidentally step on his paw.
Yeah.
Isn't that suffering?
That's a great question. And it points to a distinction that's often made, though it's debated.
What's the distinction?
Between a neurological pain response, the immediate physical reaction to something harmful, the yelp, and the emotional internal experience of suffering. So while animals clearly react to painful things, some argue that the capacity for the deeper, more prolonged emotional processing of that pain, what we might call true suffering, like grief or deep fear or prolonged distress, hasn't been definitively proven in all animals in exactly the same way we experience it.
But isn't that hard to prove either way?
Extremely hard. And many people counter that argument. They say, look, animals show very similar behavioral signs of suffering to humans: withdrawal, crying, changes in appetite, fear responses, common sense, empathy, our evolutionary closeness. It all strongly suggests they do experience suffering, even if we can't plug into their brains and measure their private feelings directly.
So for many people, the ability to suffer is the key thing.
Yes. For many ethical perspectives, especially those influenced by Singer, the capacity to suffer, to feel pain, fear, distress is the morally relevant characteristic, not necessarily high intelligence or language.
Okay, so if we accept that animals suffer, what does this mean for our everyday food choices? Because it's a massive contradiction, isn't it? Most people in the UK aren't vegetarian, yet polls show loads of people claim to be animal lovers.
It's a huge disconnect. Yeah, one source calls it doublethink.
And this is where the philosophy hits the dinner plate.
Exactly. This is where the theoretical meets the practical, and yeah, it can be jarring. For thinkers like Jonathan Safran Foer, eating meat becomes unethical if it's not strictly necessary for survival. He argues taste pleasure just isn't a strong enough justification given the suffering involved.
But others disagree.
Oh yeah. Anthony Bourdain, for example, famously defended eating meat as natural, pointing to our biology, our history. And then there's that source, Ethics for A-Level, which uses a really poignant poem to highlight this societal doublethink.
Can you share a bit?
It goes something like, "Here's the rub, the heart of the divide, our pets, our friends, held close inside. Yet the beast in the cage, the one on the plate, we grant no solace, sealed by cruel fate."
Wow. That really does capture it, doesn't it? That split view.
It does.
It makes you think. But okay, there's also the whole discussion about how meat is produced. Does the source material distinguish between, say, factory farming and other methods?
Oh, absolutely. Our sources show a pretty broad consensus, even among those who aren't fully vegetarian, against standard factory farming methods.
Why? What's described?
They're described in terms involving unimaginable pain and suffering. And it's not just vague, it means specific things.
Yeah.
Acute physical pain from procedures often done without anesthetic, think tail docking in pigs, debeaking in chickens. Then there's profound psychological suffering. Extreme crowding, constant frustration of natural instincts. Pigs want to root, hens want to nest and dust bathe. They can't do any of that. Plus, chronic health problems because they're bred for unnaturally rapid growth or high yield. It's a system, critics say, designed purely for efficiency and profit, with animal welfare a distant afterthought, if considered at all.
Okay, so if factory farming is widely seen as ethically problematic, what about humane farming or hunting? Is there an ethical way to consume animals?
That's a central point of debate, definitely. Some people argue that yes, humanely raised meat, or perhaps meat from wild-hunted animals, could be ethically okay.
Under what conditions?
If the animals genuinely have good lives, are treated well, experience minimal stress, and are killed painlessly, that's the ideal presented.
But there are still ethical questions even then.
Yes, significant ones. For example, some critics say, well, animals don't sacrifice their lives for us. We take their lives, often against their will or inclination to keep living. Is that ever truly justifiable if it's not necessary?
Right.
Others argue that even providing a good life doesn't excuse the fundamental exploitation if we still view animals as property, as commodities to be used and disposed of at our convenience.
And is truly humane even possible on a large scale?
That's another major challenge. Many argue the economic pressures of the current system create a constant race to the bottom. It makes genuinely high-welfare, truly humane practices very difficult, maybe impossible, to sustain affordably on the massive scale needed to feed billions.
What's really fascinating, though, is an argument I saw mentioned that kind of flips things. The idea that we might actually owe some animals their existence because we breed them for food, that sounds counterintuitive.
It is. It's a really provocative argument associated with the philosopher Nick Zangwill.
What's the logic?
He suggests, maybe controversially, that we might owe these animals their death in a strange way because the meat industry is the very reason they exist at all. Without it, these specific cows, pigs, chickens wouldn't have been born.
So their lives, even if shorter and ending in slaughter, are better than no life at all.
That's the core of it. The argument implies their lives are a net positive, provided they meet some minimum goodness threshold, basically, as long as they aren't constantly tortured. It's about maximizing net life in the world.
Wow. What do critics say to that?
Well, they jump on it pretty quickly. They argue, first, maximizing net life doesn't logically require killing those lives. Why not just breed them and care for them? And second, if an animal can't survive without human intervention, shouldn't we care for it like we would aim to care for severely disabled humans, rather than saying its existence justifies its slaughter? It's a compelling thought experiment, but one that raises serious ethical objections for many people.
Okay. And thinking beyond just meat, do these ethical considerations also apply to things like eggs or milk Or does it get even wider? What about plants again? Are we just trading one kind of harm for another?
That's a really crucial follow-up question. Yes, the perspective known as moral veganism extends these arguments beyond meat.
To all animal products.
To all animal products, yeah. It raises questions about whether producing eggs or milk involves similar kinds of harms. Well, for eggs, there's the routine culling of male chicks, who are useless to the egg industry. For dairy, there's the separation of calves from their mothers, the cycle of forced impregnation, the eventual slaughter of spent dairy cows. There are arguments about labor exploitation of the animals and significant environmental impacts, too.
So it's not just about the killing.
Not just about the killing, no. It's about the whole system of use. And then, you're right, it goes even deeper. Plant agriculture itself.
How so?
Some argue, look, industrial plant farming also causes animal deaths. Think about field mice, insects, birds killed during plowing, planting, harvesting, not to mention habitat destruction, and it has its own environmental footprint. Pesticides, water use, soil depletion.
So it becomes a really complex calculation.
Exactly. It raises this incredibly difficult question. Which system actually causes the least overall harm, the least suffering? Industrial animal farming, maybe free-range animal farming, or large-scale industrial plant farming. There are arguments and calculations on all sides, and frankly, no easy, universally agreed-upon answer. All food production has impacts.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit. How much do our cultural beliefs, or even our personal relationships like, having a dog or cat, shape how we view all this? It feels like we draw lines in really specific places. Dogs are family, pigs are food.
That's spot on. Culture plays a massive role here. It's undeniable. What's considered acceptable food is hugely variable.
Like cows in India.
Exactly, sacred to Hindus, or pork, forbidden in Judaism and Islam. In Western cultures, particularly America, we place this huge cultural value on dogs and cats as companions, as members of the family. So eating them feels taboo, unthinkable for most.
But pigs, even though they're really smart.
Right. Pigs, which research shows are highly intelligent, comparable to dogs in many ways, were historically bred for food. So they fall on the other side of that cultural line for most people.
Is there a philosophical take on this cultural aspect?
There is. The philosopher Cora Diamond offers a really interesting perspective. She suggests our aversion to eating certain things, like, say, human corpses, isn't primarily about abstract moral rights.
What's it about, then?
It's because, in our conceptual scheme, a person is not something to eat. It's just category error, almost, a violation of relationship.
And she applies this to animals.
She argues that if we started to genuinely view animals not as things, not as resources, but as fellow creatures, our relationship could fundamentally shift. Killing and eating them might start to feel as inappropriate, as out of bounds, as cannibalism does.
So it's less about abstract rules and more about relationship, about empathy.
Exactly. It moves beyond just abstract rights and duties and gets into how we actually relate to the world, to other beings. And that's deeply influenced by our culture, our upbringing, our empathetic imagination.
Okay. So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered a lot of ground today.
We really have.
From Kant and Descartes seeing animals almost as machines, to Singer and Reagan arguing for equal consideration or rights, through the science of sentience and suffering, the debates about plants, and then hitting the really practical, often uncomfortable stuff about our food choices. Factory farming, humane options. It's clear there's no single, easy answer everyone agrees on.
That's definitely the main takeaway. Very few moral theorists today would argue that eating animals is always acceptable under any conditions. Even those who deny animals direct duties, like Kant, still often recoiled at outright cruelty.
So where does the debate really lie now?
A lot of the ethical acceptability hinges on the empirical facts. What is the actual experience of these animals? How much do they suffer? What are their pleasures? And what's the real-world impact of the systems we use to raise and slaughter them?
So this deep dive gives people a framework.
That was the aim, to give you a robust moral framework, drawing from these different philosophical positions so you can plug in that real-world research, your own experiences, and develop your own informed viewpoint.
It definitely challenges us, doesn't it? To think critically about our assumptions, why we eat what we eat.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing how interconnected our lives are with other sentient beings, with the planet, and trying to reconcile our ideals, maybe our love for some animals, with our actual actions.
Yeah. So maybe the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over is this. If our scientific understanding of animal consciousness, animal suffering keeps evolving, and it seems to be,
pushing those boundaries.
Pushing the boundaries of moral consideration further and further. How might that fundamentally reshape things? Not just what you choose to put on your plate, but maybe your entire relationship with the living world all around you.